Two dogs howled at a locked car, and when officers broke it open, they uncovered a secret that shook the whole town. In a place where everyone knew each other, the discovery would unravel the very fabric of their community, exposing hidden betrayals and dark secrets that lay just beneath the surface. Get ready for a gripping tale of loyalty, instinct, and a shocking revelation that no one saw coming. In a small town nestled between rolling hills and surrounded by dense forests, life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Maple Street was the heart of this quaint community, lined with Victorian-style homes, white picket fences, and gardens that bloomed with vibrant colors during spring and summer. Everyone knew their neighbors by name, shared recipes at community gatherings, and watched out for one another like an extended family. Trust was the currency that held the community together, and for decades, nothing had disrupted the peaceful harmony that defined their existence. But on one seemingly ordinary afternoon in late September, when the autumn breeze carried the scent of falling leaves and the sun cast long shadows across the quiet street, two dogs would change everything. Their names were Buddy and Rex, and they were as different as night and day, yet inseparable in every way that mattered. Buddy was a loyal Labrador retriever, golden brown in color with a coat that gleamed in the sunlight. He was the kind of dog who would follow his owner to the ends of the earth without hesitation, his tail wagging at the mere sight of a familiar face. For 12 years, Buddy had been a constant presence in the neighborhood, greeting every passerby with an enthusiastic bark and a friendly demeanor that melted even the coldest hearts. Children adored him. Elderly residents found comfort in his gentle nature, and he had become an unofficial ambassador of goodwill on Maple Street. Rex, on the other hand, was a clever beagle with sharp instincts and an uncanny ability to sense things that others missed. Smaller in stature but mighty in spirit, Rex had a keen nose that could track a scent for miles and eyes that seemed to see beyond the ordinary. He was the thinker of the duo, observant and cautious, yet fiercely loyal to his companion and their owner. Together, Buddy and Rex were the heartbeat of the neighborhood, loved by everyone they encountered, from the mailman to the elderly Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 doors down. Their owner, Mr. Thompson, was an elderly widower in his 70s who had lost his beloved wife, Margaret, 5 years ago. Since her passing, the daily walks with Buddy and Rex had become his lifeline, his reason to get out of bed each morning, his connection to the world beyond the 4 walls of his modest home. These walks were sacred to him. They were moments of solitude mixed with gentle social interaction, times when he could reflect on his life while enjoying the unconditional love of his 2 faithful companions. On this particular afternoon, as Mr. Thompson set out for their usual route down Maple Street, the weather was perfect. The temperature was mild, the sky was a brilliant blue dotted with white clouds, and there was a sense of peace that seemed to envelop everything. Neighbors were tending to their gardens, children were playing in yards, and the distant sound of a lawnmower hummed in the background. It was the kind of day that made you grateful to be alive, the kind of day that promised nothing but tranquility. But then, without any warning whatsoever, something shifted. As Mr. Thompson and his 2 companions approached the corner of Maple Street and Oak Avenue, both Buddy and Rex froze simultaneously, as if struck by lightning. Their ears perked up at an angle that Mr. Thompson had never seen before, their bodies tensed with every muscle taut and ready, and their eyes locked onto something in the distance with an intensity that was almost frightening. The fur on their backs stood on end, and a low, rumbling growl emanated from deep within their chests. A locked car sat parked on the side of the street, seemingly innocent and unremarkable. It was a dark blue sedan, a few years old with tinted windows and a layer of dust that suggested it hadn't been moved in some time. To any casual observer, it It was just another vehicle parked along the residential street. But to Buddy and Rex, something about that car triggered an ancient alarm in their primal instincts, a warning system that had been honed through thousands of years of canine evolution. And then, the howling began. It wasn't a playful bark or an attention-seeking whimper. These were primal cries that seemed to come from the very depths of their souls. Desperate and urgent, bone-chilling in their intensity. The sound echoed through the quiet street, piercing the afternoon air like a siren. Buddy's howl was deep and resonant, while Rex's was higher-pitched but equally haunting. Together, they created a symphony of distress that sent shivers down the spines of everyone within earshot. Neighbors peered out from their windows, their curiosity piqued and their unease growing with each passing second. Mrs. Patterson, who had been watering her flowers, dropped her hose and rushed to her porch. The mailman, who was delivering letters a few houses down, paused and looked up, his expression shifting from indifference to concern. Some people dismissed the howling as dogs being dogs, perhaps a territorial dispute or a reaction to a stray cat. But others, those with a more intuitive nature, felt an inexplicable chill creep down their spines, a premonition that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Mr. Thompson's heart raced as he tried to calm his dogs, gently tugging on their leashes and speaking in soothing tones. But Buddy and Rex would not be comforted. Their eyes remained fixed on the locked car, and their howls only grew louder and more insistent, as if they were trying to communicate something of vital importance. In all his 12 years with Buddy and his 8 years with Rex, Mr. Thompson had never witnessed them behave this way. It was as though they had tapped into something primal, something ancient and urgent that transcended the normal boundaries of pet behavior. As more people emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, the tension in the air became almost tangible. Whispers spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. What's wrong with those dogs? Is someone in danger? Should we call the police? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and increasingly urgent. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into something charged with uncertainty and dread. Mr. Thompson felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a sensation he hadn't experienced since the day he received the phone call about his wife's accident. His hands trembled as he continued to hold the leashes, and his mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Was someone trapped in the car? Was there a threat nearby? Why were his beloved companions behaving with such desperation? With no other choice and trusting his instincts that had been sharpened by decades of life experience, Mr. Thompson made a decision that would set everything in motion. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone from his jacket pocket and dialed 911. His voice was shaky as he reported the strange behavior, describing the locked car and the dog's unusual distress to the dispatcher. The operator assured him that help would arrive shortly and advised him to keep his distance from the vehicle. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the once peaceful afternoon, cutting through the neighborhood like a knife. The sound was jarring, alien in this quiet residential area where such urgency was rarely heard. A patrol car pulled up to the curb, its lights flashing red and blue, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Officer Miller stepped out of her vehicle, her hand resting cautiously on her belt, her eyes scanning the scene with professional awareness. Officer Miller was known throughout the town for her compassion and her genuine love for animals. She had grown up with dogs, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and had a reputation for being fair, thoughtful, and deeply committed to protecting her community. At 38 years old, she had served as a police officer for over a decade, and her instincts were sharp and reliable. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this call would lead her down a path of darkness and deception that would test everything she believed about her community and challenge her in ways she could never have imagined. As Officer Miller knelt down to examine the dogs, speaking to them in a calm, reassuring voice, their howls grew louder and more insistent. It was almost as if Buddy and Rex were trying to warn her, their cries seeming to say, "Don't open this car. You're not ready for what's inside. This will change everything." Officer Miller stood up slowly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the locked car more carefully. The dog's howling had not subsided. If anything, it had become more frantic, more desperate, each cry seeming to pierce through the fabric of the peaceful afternoon. She could feel the weight of the neighborhood's gaze upon her. Dozens of eyes watching from porches, windows, and yards, waiting to see what she would do next. The responsibility of the moment settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, and she was acutely aware that every decision she made in the next few minutes could have profound consequences. Officer Sarah Miller had been on the force for over a decade, and in that time, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations. Her colleagues often joked that she had a sixth sense, an intuition that guided her toward the truth even when the evidence was unclear. This intuition had saved lives before, and as she looked at the locked vehicle and the two distressed dogs, that same intuition was screaming at her that something was terribly, desperately wrong. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice steady and professional despite the unease creeping through her mind like ivy on a wall. "How long have these dogs been doing this?" Mr. Thompson, struggling to maintain control of Buddy and Rex as they pulled against their leashes with unprecedented force, shook his head vigorously. His weathered face was creased with concern, and his hands, which had held these leashes thousands of times without incident, now trembled slightly. "Maybe 5-10 minutes now, officer. I've never seen them like this in all my years. It's not normal behavior. They just stopped dead in their tracks right here and started howling at this car like their lives depended on it. There's something wrong. I can feel it deep in my bones. In my experience, when animals act like this, there's always a reason. Always." Officer Miller nodded, acknowledging the elderly man's concern with genuine respect. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most valuable intelligence came from ordinary citizens who knew their neighborhoods intimately, who could sense the subtle shifts in the rhythm of their community. Mr. Thompson had lived on this street for nearly 30 years. If anyone would know when something was amiss, it would be him. She approached the vehicle cautiously, her hand resting near her belt, her senses heightened and alert. The car was a dark blue sedan, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with tinted windows that made it nearly impossible to see inside. The paint was faded in places, and there was a layer of dust coating the exterior that suggested it hadn't been moved in quite some time. The license plate was partially obscured by dirt, but Officer Miller made a mental note of the numbers she could see. She peered through the windows, trying to adjust her eyes to the darkness within, but the tinted glass defeated her efforts. The interior remained a mystery, shrouded in shadow. She tried the door handles, all locked, as expected. She pressed her ear against the window, listening intently, straining to hear any sound from within, but heard nothing except the relentless, anguished howling of the two dogs. The sound was haunting, almost otherworldly in its desperation. A crowd had begun to gather now, drawn by the sirens and the commotion like moths to a flame. At least 30 people lined the street, their expressions ranging from casual curiosity to genuine alarm. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down and had befriended both Buddy and Rex over the years, stood wringing her hands nervously. her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. The mailman, whose name was Derek and who had been delivering to this route for 5 years, had abandoned his delivery bag entirely on the curb and stood watching with growing concern. Young parents held their children close, unsure whether to be frightened or fascinated by the unfolding drama playing out before them. The neighborhood had transformed from a place of peaceful routine into something charged with tension and uncertainty. Officer Miller called dispatch on her radio, her voice clear and professional. "Dispatch, this is Miller. I'm at the scene on Maple Street and Oak Avenue. I have a locked vehicle with 2 dogs exhibiting signs of extreme distress and panic. The owner reports they're behaving abnormally and have never acted this way before. I'm going to need backup and possibly animal control. Can you run the plates for me? I need to know who owns this vehicle." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the radio, tinged with the static of the communication system. "Copy that, Miller. Stand by, running plates now." While waiting for the plate information, Officer Miller decided to try a different approach. She knelt down again, this time extending her hand slowly toward Buddy, moving with deliberate gentleness. She spoke in the calm, soothing tone that had worked with countless animals throughout her career, a voice that conveyed safety and understanding. "Hey there, Buddy. It's okay. I'm here to help. What's wrong? What are you trying to tell me? I'm listening." Buddy's response was immediate and visceral, almost violent in its intensity. The dog lunged forward with such force that Mr. Thompson nearly lost his grip on the leash entirely. His feet skidded slightly on the pavement as Buddy's weight pulled him forward. Buddy's paws scraped against the asphalt, leaving visible marks, and his entire body trembled with what could only be described as panic or urgent warning. Rex joined in, both dogs now in a state of what appeared to be genuine terror, their primal instincts overriding any training or socialization they had received. Their combined howling created a symphony of distress that echoed through the quiet street. Officer Miller's instincts kicked into overdrive, her years of training and experience crystallizing into a moment of absolute clarity. In her decade of service, she had learned to trust her gut implicitly, and her gut was screaming that something was seriously, critically wrong. The dogs weren't being aggressive toward her or the car. They were trying to communicate something vital. They were trying to tell her something critical, something that required immediate action. She had seen this kind of behavior before, in a documentary about rescue dogs, animals that possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger and distress. "Dispatch, I'm going to need to open this vehicle," she said into her radio, her voice carrying the weight of her decision. "I have reasonable suspicion that there may be someone inside who needs assistance. This cannot wait." "Copy that, Miller. Backup is en route. ETA 2 minutes. Proceed with caution." Officer Miller knew she couldn't wait 2 minutes. Every second felt crucial, as if time itself was running out, as if someone's life hung in the balance. She returned to her patrol car and retrieved a slim jim, a specialized tool used to unlock vehicles, from her equipment kit. Her hands were steady as she worked, her muscle memory guiding her through the familiar motions. But her mind was racing with possibilities and concerns. What would she find when she opened this car? Was there a child locked inside, abandoned and suffering? A person in medical distress? An elderly individual who had gotten confused and locked themselves in? The possibilities churned in her stomach like a storm. She positioned the slim jim carefully between the window and the door frame, feeling for the locking mechanism. Her years of training paid off as she manipulated the tool with practiced precision. She could feel the slight resistance as the tool engaged with the lock. And then, the lock clicked open with a soft sound, that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. The moment the doors swung wide, the dog's howling reached a fever pitch that was almost unbearable. Officer Miller pulled the door fully open and leaned in, her eyes adjusting to the darkness of the interior. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Empty front seats, a steering wheel, a dashboard with the kind of wear and tear you'd expect from a vehicle of this age. But then her eyes moved to the back seat, and everything inside her froze solid. There, curled up on the back seat in a fetal position, was a small figure, a child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. With blonde hair matted with sweat, her skin pale and ashen, her lips slightly parted. She was wearing a pink summer dress with white flowers embroidered on the front. The kind of dress a child might wear to a birthday party or a family gathering. But now it was wrinkled, dirty and stained with what appeared to be sweat and tears. Her small chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths, each one seeming to require tremendous effort. The heat inside the car was suffocating, almost overwhelming. Officer Miller could feel it radiating from the enclosed space, a tangible force that seemed to press down on her. She immediately reached in and checked for a pulse on the child's small neck, her fingers finding the carotid artery. It was there, faint but present, weak but unmistakable. The child was alive, but barely, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. "Oh my God," Officer Miller whispered, her voice barely audible, her professional composure cracking under the weight of the moment. She immediately reached for her radio, her voice urgent and commanding. "Dispatch, we have a child. Female, approximately 8 to 9 years old, unresponsive, possible heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Send an ambulance immediately. This is a medical emergency." Officer Miller's voice, usually so controlled and measured, cracked with urgency and emotion. She carefully lifted the girl from the back seat, cradling her small body in her arms as gently as possible. The child weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird, light as a feather. Her skin was hot to the touch, dangerously hot, and Officer Miller could feel the fever radiating from her body. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured, carrying the child away from the car and laying her carefully on the grass of a nearby lawn. "Stay with me. Help is coming. You're going to be okay." Within seconds, backup arrived. Officer Davis pulled up in his patrol car, his tires squealing slightly as he came to an abrupt stop. Moments later, an ambulance arrived, its sirens wailing through the neighborhood with an urgency that seemed to match the gravity of the situation. Paramedics rushed toward Officer Miller with a stretcher and emergency equipment, their movements practiced and efficient. They were led by Marcus Chen, a veteran paramedic with 15 years of experience, and his partner, a younger woman named Lisa Rodriguez, who was in her first year on the job. "What do we have?" Marcus asked, his voice professional and calm as he knelt beside the child. "Female child, approximately 8 or 9, unresponsive, found locked in a vehicle. Possible heat stroke. She's been in there for an unknown amount of time," Officer Miller reported, stepping back to give the paramedics room to work. Marcus and Lisa immediately began their assessment, asking rapid-fire questions about her condition, checking her vital signs, and preparing her for transport to the hospital. They worked with a kind of choreographed precision, each movement purposeful and deliberate. An IV was started, oxygen was administered, and the child was carefully placed on the stretcher. As they prepared to load her into the ambulance, Lisa looked up at Officer Miller with concern in her eyes. "She's in bad shape," Lisa said quietly. "We need to get her to the hospital now." The crowd that had gathered began to murmur, their shock and concern palpable in the air. Some covered their mouths in horror, their faces pale. Others pulled out their phones, recording the scene, capturing the moment for social media or to show friends and family later. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into something dark and sinister, and the true nature of what had happened was only beginning to unfold. As the paramedics worked on the child, preparing her for transport to the hospital, Officer Miller turned her attention back to the car. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and began a careful examination of the interior, her detective's mind already working to piece together the puzzle. On the front passenger seat, she found a purse, a brown leather bag that had seen better days. Inside were a driver's license, several credit cards, and a small amount of cash in various denominations. The name on the license was Margaret Chen, age 34, with an address on Riverside Drive on the other side of town. The photograph on the license showed a woman in her early 30s with dark hair and sharp features, her expression neutral, the standard DMV photo expression. But there was something else. Something that made Officer Miller's blood run cold. Something that sent a chill down her spine. Beneath the purse, on the floor of the passenger side, partially hidden under a discarded fast food wrapper, was a photograph. It showed the same blonde-haired girl, smiling brightly, genuinely happy, with her arm around an older woman who bore a striking resemblance to the woman in the driver's license photograph. The girl was wearing the same pink dress with white flowers. On the back of the photograph, written in neat, careful handwriting, were just 3 words: "My precious daughter." Officer Miller looked up from the photograph, her mind racing with implications and questions. Her eyes found Mr. Thompson and his 2 dogs. Buddy and Rex had stopped howling now, their mission seemingly accomplished. They sat quietly on the grass, their bodies relaxed, their eyes tracking the ambulance as it prepared to leave with the child. Red and blue lights flashing urgently. It was as if they understood that they had succeeded in their desperate plea for help, that they had done what they were meant to do. But the real questions were just beginning to form in Officer Miller's mind. Dark and troubling questions that would soon spiral outward, touching lives and revealing secrets that had been carefully hidden. Who was Margaret Chen? Where was she now? And most importantly, how did the child end up locked in this car, abandoned and dying in the heat? Was this an accident? A tragic mistake made by a forgetful parent? Or was it something more sinister? Something deliberate and calculated? The answers to these questions would soon reveal a web of secrets, lies, and betrayals that would shake the very foundation of this quiet, peaceful town. They would expose the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of suburban normalcy, the hidden motivations and desperate acts that could destroy families and communities. And they would force Officer Miller to confront aspects of human nature that she had spent her career trying to protect people from. As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens fading into the distance, Officer Miller stood in the center of the street, the photograph still clutched in her gloved hand, and whispered a silent prayer for the child. She had a feeling that this case was going to be far more complicated, far more troubling than anyone in this peaceful neighborhood could possibly imagine. The ambulance disappeared around the corner, its sirens fading into the distance like a mournful cry. Officer Miller stood motionless in the middle of Maple Street, the photograph still clutched in her gloved hand, her mind already spinning through the implications of what she had discovered. The crowd of onlookers remained scattered along the sidewalk, their initial shock beginning to transform into whispered speculation and concern. The peaceful neighborhood had been irrevocably altered, and everyone present could feel it. Officer Davis approached Miller with a concerned expression on his weathered face. Davis was a veteran officer in his 50s, a man who had seen much in his years on the force, but still maintained a sense of compassion and humanity. "Miller, now what do we have here?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Officer Miller turned to face her colleague, holding up the driver's license and the photograph. "The vehicle is registered to a Margaret Chen, 34 years old. This photograph shows the same child we just found in the car, along with what appears to be Margaret Chen. The handwriting on the back says, 'My precious daughter.'" She paused, letting the weight of the words settle between them. "We need to locate Margaret Chen immediately. This could be a case of child endangerment or worse." Davis's jaw tightened. "You think the mother locked the kid in the car deliberately?" "I don't know yet," Miller replied, her voice steady but her mind already racing through various scenarios. "But I intend to find out. We need to get a bolo out on Margaret Chen and this vehicle. We also need to canvass the neighborhood, find out if anyone saw anything, anyone coming or going from this location." Officer Davis nodded and immediately began coordinating with dispatch, putting out a "Be on the lookout" alert for Margaret Chen. Within minutes, the information was being broadcast to every patrol car in the city, and the search was officially underway. As Davis worked on the logistics, Officer Miller turned her attention back to the vehicle. She carefully photographed the interior of the car, documenting every detail: the discarded fast food wrappers on the floor, the empty water bottles in the cup holders, the child's shoe that lay abandoned on the back seat. Each item told a story, and she was determined to read every word of it. Mr. Thompson still stood nearby with Buddy and Rex, watching the scene unfold with growing concern. "Officer Miller approached him, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions. Did you see anyone near this car today? Anyone at all? Did you notice when it first arrived on this street?" Mr. Thompson furrowed his brow, thinking carefully. "I walk this route every afternoon at about this time, officer. I've noticed that car here for maybe 3 days, maybe 4. I didn't think much of it. There are always cars parked along the street. But now that you mention it, I don't recall seeing anyone getting in or out of it. It's just been sitting here." 3 or 4 days? Miller repeated, alarm bells ringing in her mind. If the child had been in that car for that long, the situation was far more serious than she had initially thought. "Mr. Thompson, you may have just saved that child's life. Those dogs of yours, they're remarkable animals." Mr. Thompson looked down at Buddy and Rex, who had finally calmed down completely, their bodies now relaxed, their eyes peaceful. "They've always been good judges of character," he said softly. "But I've never seen them react to anything like that before. It was like they were trying to tell me something was desperately wrong." Officer Miller made a mental note to follow up on this observation. Animals had saved lives before through their instincts and senses that humans couldn't fully comprehend. She would need to document this in her report. As the afternoon wore on, the scene on Maple Street began to take on the appearance of a full-scale investigation. More police officers arrived, cordoning off the area with yellow crime scene tape. A forensic team was called to process the vehicle, to collect evidence and document everything. Neighbors were interviewed one by one, their statements recorded and filed away for later analysis. Officer Miller remained at the center of it all, coordinating the investigation, asking questions, and piecing together the puzzle. She was joined by Detective Robert Hayes, a man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. Hayes had been on the force for 20 years and had solved some of the city's most difficult cases. His presence meant that the department was taking this situation very seriously. "Walk me through it," Hayes said, studying the vehicle with a careful eye. Officer Miller recounted everything. The dog's unusual behavior, the locked car, the child's condition, the discovery of Margaret Chen's identification, and the photograph. As she spoke, Hayes listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. Heat stroke is a possibility, Hayes said thoughtfully. But if the child has been in this car for 3 or 4 days, we're looking at something far more sinister. Dehydration, malnutrition, potential organ damage. The question is, was this intentional or accidental? That's what we need to find out, Miller agreed. We need to locate Margaret Chen and find out what happened. We also need to identify the child and contact her family. As if on cue, Miller's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice came through, urgent and clear. Officer Miller, we have a hit on Margaret Chen. She was admitted to Riverside Medical Center 3 days ago with a broken arm and multiple contusions. She's still there, currently in room 412. Miller and Hayes exchanged a meaningful glance. A broken arm and contusions 3 days ago, the same time the car had appeared on Maple Street. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, and it wasn't a pretty one. We're heading to the hospital, Miller said into her radio. Maintain the scene here. I want that vehicle processed thoroughly. The drive to Riverside Medical Center took 15 minutes. As they navigated through the streets of the city, Miller's mind continued to work through the possibilities. A mother with injuries, a child locked in a car for days, a photograph with the words, "My precious daughter," written on the back. What had happened? What circumstances could lead to such a situation? When they arrived at the hospital, Miller and Hayes made their way to the 4th floor, their badges allowing them to bypass the usual security protocols. Room 412 was at the end of a long corridor, and through the small window in the door, they could see a woman lying in the hospital bed, her left arm in a cast, bandages visible on her face and neck. Officer Miller knocked gently on the door before entering. The woman in the bed looked up, her eyes widening in fear when she saw the uniforms. Her name was Margaret Chen, and in that moment, as she saw the police officers entering her room, her entire body seemed to collapse inward, as if she had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, knowing it was inevitable. "Margaret Chen?" Officer Miller said, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Officer Sarah Miller, and this is Detective Robert Hayes. We need to ask you some questions about your daughter." Margaret's face went pale, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking. Is she alive? Please tell me she's alive." The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Detective Hayes pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression compassionate but serious. "Your daughter was found in your vehicle this afternoon, locked inside. She's currently at Children's Hospital being treated for heat stroke and dehydration. She's alive, but she's in serious condition." Margaret let out a sob, her body shaking with emotion. Oh God, I didn't mean to." She trailed off, unable to continue, overwhelmed by her own anguish. "Margaret, I need you to tell us what happened," Officer Miller said gently but firmly. "How did your daughter end up locked in your car?" Margaret took several shaky breaths, trying to compose herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, and the story she told would begin to unravel the carefully constructed facade of normalcy that had hidden a much darker reality. "It started 3 days ago," Margaret began, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall, as if she were looking through it into the past. "My ex-husband, David. He came to my apartment. He was angry about the custody arrangement. He said I was keeping our daughter from him, that I was poisoning her mind against him. He wanted to take her to take her away from me. She paused, swallowing hard, her hand trembling. When I refused, he became violent. He hit me. He broke my arm. He was going to take her anyway, and I couldn't stop him. I was bleeding in pain, and I couldn't protect her. So I did the only thing I could think of. I put her in the car and locked the doors. I told her to stay quiet, to hide, and that I would be back for her. I thought I could call the police, get him arrested, and then everything would be okay. But you didn't come back for her, Detective Hayes said, his voice carrying a note of understanding mixed with accusation. I couldn't, Margaret said, fresh tears streaming down her face. After David left, I was in so much pain. My arm was broken. I was bleeding. I called 911 and they brought me here. I was admitted, and I've been here ever since. I've been trying to get out of this bed, trying to get someone to help me, but I was so heavily medicated, and the doctors kept saying I needed to rest. I kept asking about my daughter, but no one listened. No one believed me. I kept saying there was an emergency, that my daughter was in danger, but everyone just thought I was confused from the pain medication. Officer Miller felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to Margaret's account. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, rearranging themselves into a different configuration. This wasn't a case of deliberate child endangerment. This was a case of domestic violence, of a mother trying to protect her child in the only way she knew how, and then being separated from her by circumstance and medical care. Where is David now? Detective Hayes asked, his mind already moving to the next phase of the investigation. I don't know, Margaret said. He left after he hit me. I haven't seen him since. But he'll come back. He always comes back. And if he finds out that I've talked to the police, that I've told you what he did. She trailed off, fear evident in her eyes. Officer Miller exchanged a glance with Detective Hayes. They had a new priority now: locating David Chen and ensuring that he couldn't harm Margaret or her daughter again. As they left the hospital room, Miller's mind was already working on the next steps. They would need to get a restraining order, ensure Margaret's safety, and coordinate with the hospital to keep David away from both Margaret and her daughter once she was admitted. They would also need to interview the child once she was stable enough to talk, though Miller dreaded that conversation. The case that had begun with two dogs howling at a locked car had become something far more complex, far more tragic. It was a story of desperation, of a mother's love, and of the systemic failures that had allowed a child to suffer while the adults in her life struggled to protect her. As Officer Miller drove back to the station, she thought about Mr. Thompson and his two dogs, about how their instincts had led them to the right place at the right time. She thought about the child, alone and terrified in that locked car, and she silently vowed that she would do everything in her power to ensure that justice was served, and that this child would never have to endure such suffering again. The real investigation was just beginning, and it would lead Officer Miller down a path far darker and more complicated than she could ever have imagined. Detective Robert Hayes sat in the cramped conference room of the police station, surrounded by case files, photographs, and scattered notes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the workspace. It was nearly midnight, and the energy in the room was tense, focused, driven by the urgency of the situation. Officer Miller stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, creating a timeline of events and connections between the various players in this unfolding drama. All right, let's establish what we know, Hayes said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the building. Margaret Chen was admitted to Riverside Medical Center 3 days ago with injuries consistent with domestic violence. She claims her ex-husband, David Chen, attacked her and threatened to take their daughter. She put the child in the car as a temporary measure to keep her safe while she called for help. She was then hospitalized and medicated. And due to a combination of miscommunication and the hospital's standard protocols, no one acted on her repeated requests for help regarding her daughter. Officer Miller nodded, adding details to the board. The child, whose name we now know as Sophie Chen, age 8 years old, was found locked in the vehicle after approximately 72 hours of confinement. She's currently in critical condition at Children's Hospital, suffering from severe dehydration, heat stroke, and malnutrition. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but she's not yet conscious enough to give a statement. And David Chen? Hayes prompted. Missing, Miller replied, her frustration evident in her voice. We've put out an APB, contacted his known associates, checked his workplace, nothing. It's as if he vanished after the assault on Margaret. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in thought. David Chen is our priority now. We need to find him before he realizes that Margaret has talked to us and before he tries to flee the jurisdiction. What do we know about him? Officer Miller flipped through the file. David Chen, age 36, works as a financial advisor at Mercer & Associates downtown. He has a history of anger, management issues. There are 2 previous domestic violence complaints, both filed by Margaret, both eventually dropped when she refused to press charges. He has a valid passport, approximately $15,000 in a readily accessible bank account, and access to a silver 2019 Honda Civic that's not the vehicle his daughter was found in. So, he has the means and the motive to disappear, Hayes observed grimly. We need to check airports, bus stations, train stations. We also need to contact his employer, his friends, his family. Someone knows where he is. As Hayes spoke, Officer Miller's phone buzzed. She checked the message, and her expression shifted. That's the hospital. Sophie's awake. She's asking for her mother. Hayes stood up immediately. Let's go. We need to talk to her while she's lucid. She may have information about David's whereabouts or his plans. The drive to Children's Hospital took 20 minutes. When they arrived, they were greeted by Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a pediatrician in her early 50s with kind eyes and a grave expression. She led them to Sophie's room, preparing them for what they would see. Sophie is conscious and relatively stable, Dr. Okonkwo explained as they walked through the corridors. However, she's experienced significant trauma, both physical and psychological. She's dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from heat exhaustion. We've started IV fluids and are monitoring her closely for organ damage. I want to caution you, she's a child, and she's been through an ordeal. Please be gentle with your questioning. Officer Miller and Detective Hayes nodded their understanding. They had both interviewed child witnesses before, and they knew the delicate balance required. Getting necessary information while protecting the child's emotional and psychological well-being. Sophie's room was designed to be as non-threatening as possible, with soft lighting, colorful posters on the walls, and stuffed animals arranged on the bed beside her. Sophie herself was small for her age, her blonde hair still matted from her ordeal, her skin pale against the white hospital sheets. An IV line ran into her arm, and monitors tracked her vital signs with constant beeping sounds. When she saw the police officers enter, her eyes widened with fear. "It's okay, Sophie," Officer Miller said gently, approaching the bed slowly and deliberately. "We're police officers. We're here to help you and your mom. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?" Sophie nodded slowly, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her voice, when she spoke, was hoarse and weak. "Where's my mom? Is she okay? I want my mom." "Your mom is at another hospital and she's going to be fine," Miller assured her. "She's been very worried about you, and she's going to come see you as soon as the doctors say it's okay. But first, we need to ask you some questions about what happened. Is that okay?" Sophie nodded again, though her eyes remained fearful and uncertain. "Can you tell us about the day your dad came to your mom's apartment?" Miller asked, her voice soft and encouraging. Sophie's lower lip began to tremble. Daddy was angry. He was yelling at Mommy. He said bad things. He said she was keeping me from him. She paused, her small hands gripping the stuffed rabbit tightly. He hit Mommy. He hit her arm and she fell down. There was blood. I was scared. Detective Hayes, standing slightly back from the bed, made careful notes documenting every word. "What happened next?" Miller prompted gently. "Mommy told me to go with her to the car. She said we were going to play a game, that I needed to hide in the car and be very quiet. She said Daddy might come looking for me, but if I was quiet, he wouldn't find me. She said she would be back soon, that she had to call for help." Sophie's voice grew quieter, more strained. "I did what she said. I went to the car and got in the back seat. Mommy locked the doors and told me not to open them for anyone except her. Then she left." "Did you see your dad after your mom left?" Miller asked. Sophie shook her head. "No, but I heard him. He was yelling outside the car. He was trying to open the doors, but they were locked. He yelled at Mommy. He said bad things. Then I heard sirens, and he went away." "And then what happened?" Miller continued, her heart aching for the child. "I waited," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "I waited for Mommy to come back. But she didn't. I waited and waited. It got really hot in the car. Really, really hot. I tried to open the doors, but they were locked. I was thirsty. I was so thirsty. I cried for Mommy, but she didn't come." Tears streamed down Sophie's face as she recounted her ordeal. "I don't know how long I waited. It felt like forever. I got tired and fell asleep. When I woke up, it was still hot. I didn't know where Mommy was. I thought maybe she forgot about me. I thought maybe she wasn't coming back." Officer Miller reached out and gently squeezed Sophie's hand. "Your mom didn't forget about you, Sophie. She was in the hospital because your dad hurt her. She was trying to get help, but the doctors didn't understand how important it was. It wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault." "Where's Daddy?" Sophie asked suddenly, fear flashing across her small face. "Is he going to come back? Is he going to hurt Mommy again?" This was the critical question, the one that would determine the trajectory of the investigation. "We're looking for your dad right now," Miller said carefully. "We're going to make sure he can't hurt your mom or you ever again. But I need you to help us. Do you know where your dad might go? Does he have friends he likes to visit? Family members?" Sophie thought for a moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "He talks about his brother, Uncle Michael. I think he lives in the mountains. Daddy likes to go there sometimes. He says it's peaceful there, that he can think." Detective Hayes' eyes sharpened. "Do you know where in the mountains? Do you remember the name of the town?" "I think it starts with an M," Sophie said uncertainly. "Mommy and Daddy used to fight about it. Daddy wanted to move there. Mommy said no." Miller and Hayes exchanged a meaningful look. This was the lead they needed. A brother in a mountain town with a name starting with M. It wasn't much, but it was something to work with. "Thank you, Sophie," Miller said warmly. "You've been very brave. You're going to be okay, and your mom is going to be okay. We're going to take care of everything." As they left Sophie's room, Dr. Okonkwo followed them into the hallway. "She's going to need psychological support," the doctor said seriously. "What she's experienced is traumatic. She'll need therapy, possibly for years. But physically, I think she's going to recover. The human body is remarkably resilient, especially in children. We're going to make sure she gets the help she needs," Detective Hayes assured the doctor. "Thank you for your care." Back in the car, heading toward the police station, Officer Miller was already on her phone, working through databases and contacts. "I'm going to need to cross-reference David Chen with his brother Michael. If we can find Michael, we can find David." "Do it," Hayes said, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "And contact the mountain towns with names starting with M. There can't be that many. We'll start with the closest ones and work our way out." By the time they returned to the station, Officer Miller had narrowed down the possibilities to 3 towns: Millbrook, Mountain View, and Meadowbrook. All 3 were within a 2-hour drive of the city, nestled in the foothills of the mountain range that bordered the region. "I'll make calls," Miller said, already reaching for the phone. "We'll contact the local police departments in each town and ask them to check for Michael Chen." As the night wore on, the investigation intensified. Officer Miller spoke with police departments in each town, describing David and Michael Chen, asking for any information about their whereabouts. By 3 in the morning, she had received a call back from the police chief in Mountain View, a small town of about 5,000 people nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. "We have a Michael Chen here," Chief Walter Thompson said over the phone. "He owns a cabin about 5 miles outside of town. We can send officers to check it out if you'd like." "Do it," Miller said immediately. "And be careful. David Chen is considered dangerous. He's wanted for questioning in a domestic violence assault and child endangerment case." An hour later, Chief Thompson called back. "We found him. David Chen was at his brother's cabin. He's in custody now. He tried to run when he saw our vehicles, but we caught him about a mile from the property. He had a packed bag and a significant amount of cash on him. It looks like he was planning to disappear." Officer Miller felt a wave of relief wash over her. The most dangerous part of the case was now contained. David Chen was in custody, unable to harm Margaret or Sophie further. "Thank you, Chief Thompson," Miller said. "We'll coordinate with your department to arrange his transfer back to our jurisdiction." As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the police station, Officer Miller allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The case was far from over. There would be interrogations, court proceedings, and the long process of justice. But the immediate danger had been averted. A child had been saved, a mother had been protected, and a dangerous man had been apprehended. But as she looked at the files spread across her desk, at the photographs of Sophie's ordeal and Margaret's injuries, Officer Miller knew that the real work was just beginning. The legal system would need to be navigated, protective orders would need to be filed, and both Margaret and Sophie would need support as they rebuilt their lives in the aftermath of this trauma. She thought about Buddy and Rex, about their remarkable instincts that had led them to the right place at the right time. She made a mental note to visit Mr. Thompson and thank him properly, perhaps to bring those remarkable dogs some treats and recognition for their heroic actions. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the police station, illuminating the faces of officers who had worked through the night to bring this case to resolution. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable, to seeking justice, and to making their communities safer. The case of Sophie Chen was far from over, but the first chapter had been written, and it was one of hope, resilience, and the power of instinct and compassion to overcome tragedy. The interrogation room at the police station was deliberately austere. Concrete walls painted a pale, institutional gray, a metal table bolted to the floor, and uncomfortable chairs designed to discourage lingering. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. David Chen sat across from Detective Robert Hayes and Officer Sarah Miller, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. Despite his circumstances, he maintained an air of controlled composure, though his jaw was clenched and his eyes burned with barely suppressed rage. David Chen was a handsome man in a conventional way. Sharp features, dark hair meticulously styled, the kind of appearance that likely served him well in his financial advisory career. But there was something cold in his eyes. Something that suggested the polished exterior concealed a far darker interior. He wore an orange jail jumpsuit now, a stark contrast to the expensive business attire he typically favored. Detective Hayes activated the recording device, speaking clearly for the benefit of the record. This is Detective Robert Hayes conducting an interview with David Chen on December 11, 2025, at 6:47 a.m. Also present is Officer Sarah Miller. Mr. Chen, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights? I understand, David said, his voice smooth and controlled. And I don't need an attorney. I'm happy to cooperate. Hayes exchanged a brief glance with Miller. Suspects who were eager to cooperate without legal representation were often either extremely confident in their innocence or extremely arrogant in their belief that they could manipulate the situation. Based on what they knew about David Chen, Hayes suspected it was the latter. Tell us what happened 3 days ago at Margaret Chen's apartment, Hayes said, settling back in his chair. David took a deep breath, as if preparing to deliver a well-rehearsed speech. Margaret and I have been having custody disputes regarding Sophie. I believe I have rights as a father, and I believe Margaret has been deliberately preventing me from seeing my daughter. 3 days ago, I went to her apartment to discuss the matter. Margaret became hostile and unreasonable. She refused to allow me to see Sophie. I became frustrated, yes, but I did not assault her. She fell during our argument. It was an accident. Officer Miller leaned forward slightly. Margaret has a broken arm and multiple contusions. Those injuries are consistent with being struck repeatedly, not from a single fall. Margaret is prone to exaggeration, David said dismissively. She's always been dramatic. She probably fell and then blamed me for it. She's been trying to turn Sophie against me for years. She's been poisoning my daughter's mind. Is that why you put Sophie in a locked car and left her there for 3 days? Hayes asked, his voice carrying an edge of controlled anger. David's composure flickered for just a moment, a crack in his facade. I didn't put Sophie in the car. Margaret did. Margaret locked her in there. I was trying to take Sophie with me, and Margaret panicked. She shoved Sophie into the car and locked the doors. I heard Sophie crying. I tried to get her out, but Margaret had the keys. Then the police arrived, and I left. You left your 8-year-old daughter locked in a car in the middle of summer? Miller said, her voice sharp with accusation. You didn't call for help? You didn't try to break the window? You just left? I panicked, David said. And for the first time, there was a hint of something almost like genuine emotion, in his voice. I was afraid I was going to be arrested. Margaret had called the police. I didn't know what to do. I thought Margaret would let Sophie out. I thought it was just a temporary thing, that she was angry and trying to keep me from taking Sophie. I didn't think. He trailed off, and Hayes pressed forward. You didn't think what? You didn't think Sophie would be in danger? You didn't think she might die in that car? Of course not, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I thought Margaret would let her out. I thought it would be fine. Officer Miller stood up abruptly, her patience clearly exhausted. Mr. Chen, your daughter was in that car for 72 hours. She was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from heat stroke. She was unconscious when we found her. If it hadn't been for 2 dogs alerting neighbors to her presence, she would have died. She would have died because you were too much of a coward to help her. David's face flushed with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about my relationship with Margaret or with Sophie. You're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Then help us understand, Hayes said calmly, his voice a sharp contrast to Miller's intensity. Help us understand how a father could abandon his daughter in a locked car. Help us understand how you could drive away knowing she was in danger. I didn't know she was in danger, David insisted, his voice rising. I thought Margaret would take care of her. I thought it was just a temporary situation. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. But I didn't intentionally harm Sophie. I would never intentionally harm my daughter. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes fixed on David's face. Where were you planning to go when we found you at your brother's cabin? You had a packed bag, significant cash, and a passport. It sounds like you were planning to disappear. David's jaw tightened. I was scared. I didn't know what Margaret had told the police. I didn't know if I was going to be blamed for her falling. I thought it would be better to leave town for a while, to let things cool down. You were running, Miller said flatly. You were running from the consequences of your actions. I was protecting myself, David corrected. There's a difference. Hayes stood up, signaling that the interview was concluding. David Chen, based on the evidence we have and your own statements, you are being charged with child endangerment, domestic violence assault, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. You'll be held without bail pending your arraignment. An attorney will be assigned to you if you cannot afford one. As officers came to escort David back to his holding cell, he called out after them. I want to see Sophie. I want to see my daughter. You can't keep me from her. I have rights as a father. Officer Miller turned back, her expression cold. Your rights as a father ended the moment you abandoned your daughter in a locked car. You'll see your daughter in court, Mr. Chen. That's the only place you'll see her. Back in the conference room, Officer Miller and Detective Hayes reviewed the interview, their minds already working on the prosecution strategy. The case against David Chen was solid. They had physical evidence, witness statements from Margaret and Sophie, and his own admissions during the interview. But they both knew that the legal system could be unpredictable, that clever lawyers could sometimes find loopholes or create reasonable doubt. We need to make sure we have everything documented, Hayes said, making notes on a legal pad. We need Margaret's medical records showing the extent of her injuries. We need Sophie's medical records showing the effects of her ordeal. We need statements from the hospital staff about Margaret's repeated requests for help. We need everything that shows David's negligence and cruelty. I'll coordinate with the prosecutor's office, Miller said. "And I want to make sure Margaret and Sophie have access to victim advocates and counseling services. This case is going to be difficult for them, no matter the outcome." Over the next several weeks, the case against David Chen proceeded through the legal system. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sandra Volkov, who specialized in domestic violence and child endangerment cases, built a comprehensive case against him. Margaret testified about the assault, about her injuries, about her desperate attempt to protect Sophie. Sophie, with the help of a child psychologist and victim advocate, gave her own testimony about the terror and suffering she had endured in that locked car. David's defense attorney, a man named Gerald Winters, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics, attempted to paint Margaret as an unstable woman who had deliberately locked Sophie in the car out of spite. He argued that David's actions, while perhaps ill-advised, were not criminal in nature. He suggested that the real villain in this story was Margaret, that she was the one who had endangered Sophie, not David. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic evidence from the car showed no signs of forced entry, supporting the theory that Sophie had been locked inside from the outside. Medical evidence showed that Margaret's injuries were consistent with repeated blows, not a single fall. And most damaging of all, Sophie's testimony, delivered in a small voice but with remarkable clarity for a child, described exactly what had happened. Her father's violence, her mother's desperate decision to protect her, and her father's subsequent abandonment. On a cold January morning, 6 weeks after Sophie was found in the car, David Chen was convicted on all charges. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Morrison, who had presided over numerous domestic violence cases, sentenced him to 15 years in prison, with an additional 5 years of probation upon release. She also issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting him from having any contact with Margaret or Sophie without the explicit permission of a family court judge. As the verdict was read, Margaret sat in the courtroom gallery with her arms still in a cast, tears streaming down her face. Officer Miller stood nearby, having attended the trial, to support the victim. When the judge announced the sentence, Margaret turned to Miller and squeezed her hand, a gesture of gratitude and relief. Sophie did not attend the trial. The prosecutor and victim advocates had agreed that it would be too traumatic for the child to see her father convicted. Instead, she remained in the care of Margaret's sister, who had come to stay with them during the proceedings. But in the weeks following the trial, as Sophie began her long journey of healing and recovery, she would occasionally ask her mother about Officer Miller and the 2 dogs that had saved her life. "Can we visit them?" Sophie asked one afternoon, as she and her mother sat together on the couch, watching the winter rain streak down the windows. Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not yet. The trauma of what had happened was still fresh, still raw. But she could see that her daughter was beginning to heal, beginning to move forward. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Margaret said. "Let's find them and say thank you properly." 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, Margaret and Sophie stood on the sidewalk in front of Mr. Thompson's house. They had brought a gift, a large basket filled with treats, toys, and a donation to the local animal shelter in honor of Buddy and Rex. Officer Miller had arranged the meeting, and she stood nearby as Mr. Thompson opened his door, a warm smile crossing his weathered face when he saw his visitors. "Well, hello there," Mr. Thompson said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I believe you two have some business with a couple of 4-legged heroes." Sophie's face lit up as Buddy and Rex came bounding out, their tails wagging with enthusiasm. The dogs, as if they understood the significance of the moment, were gentle with Sophie, allowing her to pet them and play with them without any of the frantic energy they had displayed that day on Maple Street. "Thank you," Margaret said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for what your dogs did. Thank you for saving my daughter's life." Mr. Thompson placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "They did what dogs do best. They listened to their instincts and tried to help. But I'm glad they could make a difference. This little one deserves a good life, a safe life. I hope you both get that now." As Sophie laughed and played with the dogs, Margaret and Officer Miller stood together, watching the scene unfold. "How is she doing?" Miller asked quietly. "Better," Margaret replied. "She has nightmares sometimes. She's scared of being alone in enclosed spaces. But she's resilient. Children are remarkable that way. And having her father in prison, knowing that he can't hurt us anymore, it helps. It helps a lot." Officer Miller nodded. She had seen many cases in her career, had witnessed the aftermath of violence and trauma countless times. But there was something about this case, something about the way it had unfolded, that had stayed with her. Perhaps it was the dogs. Perhaps it was the courage of a frightened mother trying to protect her child. Or perhaps it was simply the reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people and animals who would step forward to help, who would risk themselves to protect the vulnerable. "You did good work," Miller said to Margaret. "You protected your daughter. You made the right choice in that moment, even though it had terrible consequences. You're a good mother." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of something other than grief. Perhaps acceptance, perhaps the beginning of forgiveness for herself. "I keep replaying that day in my head," she said softly. "I keep thinking about all the things I could have done differently. But you're right. Given the circumstances, given what I knew at that moment, I did the best I could. I protected my daughter." As the afternoon wore on and Sophie's laughter filled the air, mingling with the barks and playful growls of Buddy and Rex, Officer Miller felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The case was closed. Justice had been served. And most importantly, a child had been saved. A mother had been protected. And a dangerous man had been removed from society. But the real story, Miller reflected, wasn't about the legal system or the criminal justice process. It was about the power of instinct, the courage of ordinary people, and the remarkable capacity of both humans and animals to recognize danger and respond to it. It was a story about a mother's love, a child's resilience, and the kindness of neighbors and strangers who were willing to help. As she drove away from Mr. Thompson's house that evening, Officer Sarah Miller felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in weeks. The case of Sophie Chen would stay with her for the rest of her career, a reminder of why she had become a police officer in the first place. To protect the vulnerable, to seek justice for the victimized, and to make her community a safer place for all its inhabitants. Sophie Chen stood on the stage of her elementary school, accepting an award for academic achievement. She had returned to school after her ordeal, had thrown herself into her studies with a determination that impressed her teachers and counselors. She still had moments of fear, still struggled with anxiety and the occasional nightmare. But she was thriving. She was healing. Margaret Chen sat in the audience, watching her daughter with pride in her eyes. She had returned to work, had rebuilt her life piece by piece. She had completed a domestic violence support group, had worked with a therapist to process her trauma, and had become an advocate for other victims of domestic violence. She had also filed a civil lawsuit against the hospital for their failure to respond appropriately to her requests for help regarding Sophie, a case that was still ongoing, but showed promise. Officer Sarah Miller attended the ceremony as well, sitting near the back of the auditorium. When Sophie saw her, the child's face broke into a wide smile, and she waved enthusiastically. Miller waved back, feeling a warmth in her chest that reminded her why she did this work, why she dedicated her life to protecting people. After the ceremony, as people mingled in the school hallway, Sophie ran up to Officer Miller and threw her arms around her in a tight hug. "Officer Miller, you came. Did you see me get my award?" "I did," Miller said, returning the hug. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. You're a remarkable young woman." "I've been thinking about Buddy and Rex," Sophie said, her eyes bright. "Can we visit them again soon? I miss them." "I think that can be arranged," Miller said with a smile. "I'll talk to your mom about it." As Miller watched Sophie run back to her mother, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A year ago, Sophie had been locked in a car, fighting for her life. A year ago, Margaret had been in a hospital bed, separated from her daughter, her pleas for help going unheeded. A year ago, David Chen had been a free man, a danger to his family and a threat to the safety of his community. Now, Sophie was thriving. Margaret was rebuilding her life. David Chen was in prison, where he could no longer harm anyone. And Buddy and Rex, two ordinary dogs with extraordinary instincts, had become local heroes, their story told and retold in the community as a reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of listening to those around us. Officer Sarah Miller left the school that afternoon with a sense of profound satisfaction. The case was closed, but its impact would ripple outward for years to come. It would inspire changes in hospital protocols regarding patient requests for emergency assistance. It would raise awareness about domestic violence and child endangerment. It would remind the community of the importance of paying attention to the people and animals around us, of listening to instincts, and of being willing to help when we see something wrong. Most importantly, it would serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of a mother's love, and to the remarkable ability of ordinary people and animals to make an extraordinary difference in the world.